So a couple days ago, we did a podcast that launched. It was a little bit different than the usual. It was a coaching call that I had with one of my students, Wyatt. And I shared it without any context. And it was like a 50-minute behind the scenes look at what an actual coaching call looks like. And 50 minutes is really long considering like most of these podcasts, I try to keep them to like 5 to 10, 15 minutes at the most. And so if you were listening to that, if you like tuned in, you're like, oh, 15 minutes, I ain't got time for that. I think you missed a lot of really gold nuggets. And I don't want those to go by the wayside. So I wanted to share with you 3 ideas that came from that coaching call with Wyatt that I think are really, really important for everybody, regardless of where you are on your entrepreneurial journey. So number 1 was dealing with overwhelm. So the call really kicked off with the fact that, so a little context, Wyatt and I have been working together for a number of years in the real estate sector. He is a young buck who was making the jump from single family up to multifamily. He is, by the time he was 27, he's acquired $20 million of real estate. So he's crushing it. Like by comparison, I was living in a van when I was 28. So he's way ahead of where I was. And so he's been smashing it there. And now he wants to get into the educational space, start sharing what he's learned. He wants to coach. He wants to create an educational program in a community so he can start teaching other young bucks like him how he did what he did. And so the genesis of the call was, okay, what's this look like to make this product launch, this new community, this new coaching program? And he was feeling overwhelmed because when you're launching a new thing, there's so many variables to keep in mind. You're zooming in and out between the macro plan of like, what's the big business plan and the goal and the objective here? And then you're having to like zero into the micro and saying, okay, what's the very next step that needs to be taken to make progress towards the macro goal? And it can be so hard in the beginning because you don't have clarity yet between both the macro and the micro. And so your mind kind of wiffle waffles back and forth. And it's like when you're staring at a forest or like a bunch of trees, right? Your eyes are you kind of focus in and out of just seeing all the trees. And then all of a sudden you look and you see one specific tree or maybe one leaf on a tree. And this can cycle really, really quickly in the entrepreneur's mind because you just know there's so many balls you need to be juggling. And so the first concept was just understand that overwhelm stems from a lack of clarity. And that by getting clear about where we're going and how we're going to get there and what the next steps are, that the overwhelm starts to go away. And one of the things that I found very helpful in my own journey is that you can only focus on the macro and the micro at one time. You can't do both simultaneously. Again, looking at that forest, you can't see both the forest and the singular tree at the same time. You can only see one or the other. And you have to give yourself permission when you're focusing on the one to forget about the other. And that's very, very hard because we're always filled with the sense of like, oh, I'm not doing the thing that needs to be done, or this other thing I'm ignoring, I'm not paying attention. What happens if, right? And so then we go into this multitasking mode as entrepreneurs, kind of just like rapid fire task switching between these things. And then nothing moves forward. And then you feel even more frustrated and overwhelmed, right? So just number 1, give yourself permission. If you're going to focus on the macro, focus on the macro while you're doing that, laying out the business plan. If you're focusing on what's the next step, be where you are, be where your feet are, and give yourself that permission. Because a lot of times the reason we feel overwhelmed as entrepreneurs is because we haven't given ourselves the permission to ignore the things that we're not currently focused on. Like focus in a lot of ways is an act of courage because you are cutting off your field of concentration from everything else except for the thing that's in front of you. And that means there's a lot of dangers that are lurking just outside that periphery. And so focusing is an act of courage. And you got to be able to give yourself permission to go and do that. Okay, number 2 is pricing structures for digital products. This was a really interesting one because I love digital products, but you need to be very intentional about like how you price them because you could have the greatest product in the world and you could have a ravenous audience, but if your structure, your offer isn't compelling, then nobody's going to buy it. And I think the biggest lever that you have is through pricing. And that doesn't necessarily mean making the item cheaper, mind you, right? Like, because perceived value is everything. If you are, in the case of Wyatt, he's teaching you how to go and buy a single family residence that you can turn into an investment property, and that could yield you $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in the span of 9 to 10 months, right? So if you're coming and he's only charging you $20 for that, there's such a disequilibrium between perceived, like the value that you're receiving versus value that you're paying, that most people will look at that and go, that doesn't make sense. Like, this must not be really worth it, but probably doesn't actually work. Whereas when you price it higher, it's more premium. And now people are a little bit more confident that the product can actually deliver the thing. And so getting pricing right is a nuanced, very nuanced actually. There's a lot that goes into it, but I won't break it all down here. If you want, go watch that coaching call with Wyatt to get the real deep down stuff. Okay, the other part of this is how to make subscriptions super sticky. So he wants to build a community of people who are part of it and keep recurring every month, because monthly revenue is great. It's consistent. It's very passive if you do it right. But how do you make a sticky, engaging community is one of the questions. So number one is to recognize every community reverts to the mean. And what I mean by that is, if you have a room full like with 5 badasses and you have 5 tire kickers, then what do you suppose is going to happen? Do you suppose the tire kickers are going to get raised up to the level of the badasses, or do you think the badasses are going to look around, realize that 50% of the people aren't really taking this seriously, and because they're a badass and recognize the value of their time and they're in hot pursuit of their goals, they're just going to leave the room? And therefore, the overall badass quotient in the room is going to slowly drop. And the way I think about this is that if you're the average of the 5 people that you associate with, you need to be very intentional that those 5 people are all pulling each other, or at least close enough that one isn't getting pulled down at the expense of everybody else getting pulled up. Because in my experience, it's much easier to pull badasses down than it is to pull tire kickers up. And so you need to be very guarded with who you allow into your communities, because the value of a community is not predicated on you, the individual, the host of the thing. That's part of it. That's what gets people in. But what keeps people there is when they look around at their peers and they say, these are the people that are worth being around. And so if that quality drops, then your stickiness is going to drop, and you're going to lose the people that you want to actually have in the community, because you want badasses buying your products and using it, because they're the ones that are going to implement it and put it to good use and then get results, and then they're going to come back and be raving fans and tell all their friends about it, right? The tire kickers, you might have the best product in the world, but if they're not in a place in their life where they're actually going to implement it, then it doesn't matter. They're not going to use it, and then nobody's going to hear about it. And so you marketed it to the wrong person. Number 2 is to boost retention in a community, you can just simply create an accountability structure, because a lot of times people join communities not because they lack the information, it's because they lack the what would we call it, the customization and the implementation. So customizing it, the information that they already know to their particular needs, right? And then how to actually implement, what are the next steps that they need to take. The other reason is for accountability. Like, this is the big reason most people need coaching, is just somebody to look over their shoulder and hold them accountable to the goals that they set for themselves. Because, you know, the most important person that you need to keep your promises to is yourself, and yet you are also the easiest one to break your promises to. So simply having somebody who's looking over your shoulder and holding you accountable goes a very long way. But this can be difficult, especially as your community starts to grow, and so you want to do this in a way that scales. And a simple way that I found effective is to hire a VA who every week at the beginning of the week sends out a text message to all the students and says, hey, what's the biggest what are the 3 tasks that you're committed to executing this week that are going to move you towards your goals? Get them to articulate, write it down, because goals that are written have a much higher likelihood of being achieved than the ones that aren't written down. So get them to write it down and share it with them. And then your VA is going to take that response, they're going to put it into a spreadsheet, they're going to document this over time, and then on Friday, they're going to reach back out and they're just going to ask, did you complete your 3 tasks? If not, why and what needs to change so that we don't miss them again next week. Again, you're going to record the answers, you'll put it in the spreadsheet. This is powerful. Even though your student knows this is just a VA that's reaching out to them, just having somebody that they're accountable to, sharing this stuff with, and then when you do your weekly or monthly coaching calls, having them come and be like, okay, so it looks like you've done a good job. 70% of the time you're hitting your goals. What's happening this other 30%? Because if we can improve that, like the downstream effect of that is massive. So like, what's happening here, right? This is a great way to keep people engaged and keep them active, both in the community and in the program, to make sure, again, that they get the results that you want them to, because you want them to get the results first. Because why else would you want to coach something? Why would you teach something if you don't want to like change people's lives? And then 2, you're not going to continue growing if they don't get the results. So you're just going to feel terrible about yourself. But anyways, those are a couple of ideas that came from that coaching call with Wyatt. There's a whole lot more that we dove into. Like, there's a lot more. We talked about how to pitch high ticket items without being weird and awkward. We talked about the power of framing to make big numbers not feel so big. So go check out that podcast episode. I think it was called Live Coaching Call or Behind the Scenes Coaching Call with Wyatt or with a student or something like that. So go check it out. 52 minutes of content that, you know, full transparency, guys, like those calls, like to get on a one-on-one coaching call with me, it's over $1,000 an hour. And so that's pretty much $1,000 of private coaching for free. I highly recommend you go check it out. Okay. So that's going to do it for me, guys and gals. I appreciate you as always. Thank you for being here. I'll catch you back around these parts tomorrow. But until then, stay hyper-focused, my friends.